decline of some 21% in that response. That answer is at the lowest point that we've seen in our business survey since 2002. That's something we need to be paying attention to. Now, rank the Fox Cities as a place to live. Wow. Over the past many years, more than 90% of our respondents said this is a great place to live. Let's look at 2014 or 2015's answer. It dropped off. Still 87%, but look at the decline. And I'm going to tell you something that you might not like to hear. That answer, that percentage is the lowest that we recorded since the survey began in 1995. Why is this so important? Well, if people here feel that the quality of life, the quality of the area as a place to do business is somehow slipping away a little bit, especially on our business side, that means that they're perhaps going to be a little bit more open to listening to alternatives from other communities. We want to make sure that that trend line reverses itself. We're going to have to keep an eye on that one as well. So, we also asked our respondents to give us an indication of where they think the economy is going. So let's take a look at what they said last year. Employment increase, sales, and profits. These are what the projections were from our survey respondents last year. How did they fare with their projections? Well, they came pretty darn close overall. I want to point out that none of this is statistically valid. But you'll see, and I think you're seeing in the results, that there's some consistency. Even though it's not statistically valid, we're not seeing a lot of big swings at all from year to year or from question to question. The responses that we're getting are pretty consistent overall, so the integrity of the survey appears to be fairly good. So now we're going to ask this year's respondents, what do they see on the horizon for the coming year? So again, this is what they forecast last year. This is what they're forecasting this year. Pretty amazing parallel there. They're not off by much in terms of reality, and they're not off by much in terms of year to year. So again, about the same percentage of the respondents from this year's survey as the last project an increase in sales. Still a very strong number. And again, a little less, but a very strong number project an increase in profitability in their own company. Now, projections in employment, you'll see here, this is a very encouraging sign where we're seeing a trend moving in the right direction, and in fact, that percentage represents the strongest answer that we've seen in this survey since 2005. So it's been more than 10 years. And then finally, we asked the respondents to give us an indication of their perception of what will happen with our local economy over the next year. And you can see an overwhelming majority indicate they have a sense that the economy on a local level will grow. And we see a fairly significant increase from last year's responses. So that gives you kind of a sense of the survey. But again, I said this is a tour. And we're going to give you a little bit of a bonus tour this morning because we're now going to take a quick look at some of the real numbers that we draw from federal sources like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and give you a sense how does our perception, our survey responses, how do they line up with what we're seeing out of the federal government for statistics. So we're going to start by looking at manufacturing. And this is a graph that shows 4-year employment trends within our local manufacturing sector. That's a pretty good direction overall. We're seeing manufacturing grow here in the Fox Cities, get this, at 4 times the national rate, at 3 times the state rate. This is our strongest sector, and it's showing significant growth. That looks like a pretty neat slide, but let's take another look at this, if you would. That goes back 4 years. Now let's go back 12 years. And what you were just looking at is this portion of the slide. Look over here. This goes back to 2002, where we had some 43,000 workers in the manufacturing sector. That's down to 36,000 now. news is that the trend line is moving in a very strong direction, but we have a long way to go to catch up to where we were at one period in time. Now let's look at the same kind of growth in employment over all industry sectors. And again, over the past several years, we're seeing some very strong growth, and in particular, this last year has been significantly strong in growth of employment throughout all of our industry sectors. Now let's take a look at the last 12 years again. I think I rode that roller coaster at some amusement park several years ago. I mean, that is classic, isn't it? We peaked here in 2007. The good news is that we're almost back to that peak again. So things are moving in a very clear direction. I want to talk to you just briefly about where we see things going in terms of the economy as it relates to wages. $43,048 represents the annual wage paid in the Fox Cities across all industries. So that takes in everything from hospitality to engineering, manufacturing, etc. So that would lead you to believe that there are some industry sectors that pay less than that wage, and there are others that pay more than that wage. Our focus should be on trying to attract and retain, in particular, those industry sectors who pay above that average wage. What are they? So we look at this graph, and we show that these are the industry sectors that pay more than that average $43,000 wage. We come over here, and we see that manufacturing is our strongest. 2.50, that's a location quotient. That means we have 2.5 times the amount of manufacturing activity in our community as across the country in the normal situation. We come down here, management of companies and enterprises, 1.69. We're in a very strong position here, and that's really cool because that sector pays an average wage of $97,000. Finance and insurance, we have more than average here. We know we have very great companies in this sector right here in the Fox Cities. Construction, we've got a very strong construction sector. But then we take a look at the gold sectors: healthcare and social assistance, public administration, information, professional, scientific, and technical services, and utilities. Those are areas of opportunity. Those are areas, sectors where we do not have the amount of activity that a normal community of our size would normally experience. So these are opportunities to grow the economy, to expand and diversify the local economy. I'm going to leave you on a high note. When we look at where our wages going over time, we see that in the last year, wages across the U.S. grew at a rate of 1.8%. In the state of Wisconsin, they grew by 1.5%. In the Fox Cities, anybody care to take a guess? 1.9%. So, over the last 12 months, our local wages have grown at a faster rate than those of the nation as a whole. So, I want to thank you for your attention and time on our tour today. I hope you'll come back for another tour at a future time. We've appreciated having you aboard, and it's now my pleasure to bring up Mary Wetstein from Advantage Bank, and she's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
We strongly support the communities in which our colleagues and clients live and work. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. John Thayer is Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer with Associated Private Client and Institutional Services. John leads the investment management team at Associated Trust Company, which has over $8 billion in assets under management. John has been a valued colleague at Associated for 15 years and brings over 30 years of experience in trust services and portfolio management. He is frequently called upon to speak on capital markets and economic trends. A graduate of the University of Michigan, where he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics, John has also earned the designations of Chartered Financial Analyst and Certified Financial Planner. He is also an active member of the CFA Society of Milwaukee. Ladies and gentlemen, John Thayer.
How about now? Now we're on, yeah, thanks, great. All right, so in keeping with the theme of charts and graphs, I'll be able to live up to that. And then in response to Shannon's comment about me screwing this up, not even I could screw this up, things are pretty good. And in a group this large, it's a pleasure to be able to present good news as opposed to making excuses for bad news. What I'd like to do, the first slide is kind of a tour around the world, if you will, to set the backdrop. We live in a global economy, and to Larry's point, we'd like to send products around the country, around the world, get the revenue back from that to help our community. But we're living in interesting times. We have a decoupled economy. The U.S. is leading the global economy. And there are challenges in other places of the world that we'll just briefly touch on. And then we'll focus most of our time sort of supporting Larry's slides, but at a national level. The trends are the same there. And then I'll conclude with what I think are the takeaways, at least for the next 12 months. Here we go. Okay, we talked about global growth decoupling. As we look at the United States, it's clearly leading the global recovery. Other major developed economies are at levels either approaching recession or they're currently in recession. And there's a growing concern that the recent collapse in commodity prices might be signaling a major concern of deflation. This is a different type of challenge than the New England Patriots faced during the playoffs. It's very problematic for the world economy, and all central banks around the world, I'm pleased to say, are doing what they can do with the tools that they have to fight this. Europe was sort of the last to respond to this, but even they have embarked on a very aggressive quantitative easing program that will hopefully help to reflate their economy and head off the risk of deflation. So signposts of recovery in the United States. We're going to spend some time looking at employment from two different perspectives. We'll look at the payroll report, and we'll look at the initial unemployment claims. Very, very encouraging trends there. Employment is clearly an important consideration in our economy. It's the number one factor that leads to consumer confidence. And when you see businesses hiring, you know that they're confident. When we look at our gross domestic product as a country, 70% is consumption. So the consumer plays a significant role in that. Consumer confidence will lead to economic growth, and we think the United States is on the right path there. With respect to domestic growth, Larry touched on the improvement that we've seen in manufacturing, and we believe that we're in the midst of a manufacturing renaissance at the present time. If we look at manufacturing jobs in the United States, they peaked in 1979 at roughly 20 million. At the trough of the recession, we've fallen below 11 million. We're now at about 12.3 million in manufacturing. It's very encouraging to see the job growth in that particular sector because not only does it pay high wages, but when you look at the multiplier that a manufacturing job creates, it's second only to the energy industry. So for every job that's created in manufacturing, it leads to other jobs in primarily in the service sector. So encouraging news there. Let's get to the less encouraging news, which are the developed foreign market challenges. Europe, they've had a slowdown in economic growth, structural issues related to the participants in the Eurozone. I think Greece will, I think we're close to a solution on that, probably coming by the end of the month. Eurozone is not like our country and our central bank. They have a common currency. They have economies that are doing extremely well, and then they have those like Greece that have huge structural issues. So Greece's economy, their GDP has been cut by about 40%. They have 30% overall unemployment, and for youth unemployment, that is 25 and below, their unemployment rate is running at 50%. We have a new radical left party who wants to go back to the austerity measures. The question is, how do you pay for those things? As I mentioned, I think we'll see some resolution on that before we get to the end of the month. Japan has some structural issues, but they've embarked on a very aggressive quantitative easing program. And there are some early signs that suggest that we're seeing improvement there as well. And then the emerging markets. These are oftentimes referred to as the BRIC countries. The acronym BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China.